In this podcast episode, Brené Brown, a renowned researcher and author, delves deeply into the intricate themes of vulnerability, courage, leadership, connection, and the complex social landscape of today's world. The conversation is an exploration of the human experience framed by Brown's unique research in shame, empathy, and resilience. Brown begins the discussion by defining vulnerability as the emotion that arises from uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. Contrary to common belief, vulnerability is not a sign of weakness, but the very foundation of courage. Drawing from her interactions with military personnel and professional athletes, Brown highlights that true acts of courage inherently require vulnerability. Without stepping into that uncertain emotional space, courage cannot exist. This reframing challenges societal norms that have long equated vulnerability with fragility or incompetence. Brown's own upbringing, characterized by a culture that allowed only anger but prevented expressions of sadness or vulnerability, illustrates the personal and cultural barriers to embracing vulnerability. She relates how such emotional repression leads to armor, defensive mechanisms that protect against fear, yet simultaneously disconnect individuals from love, connection, and their core values. The conversation underscores that becoming brave with one's life and work demands more training and conscious effort than merely allowing oneself to feel vulnerable automatically. Closely linked to vulnerability is the concept of armor, the protective behaviors we adopt when afraid. Brown emphasizes that everyone experiences fear. It is universal and nothing to be ashamed of. However, the dangerous element is how people respond to this fear by erecting armor. These defensive reflexes distance us from authentic engagement with others and ourselves. The hardest part is becoming aware of what armor we reach for in moments of fear and how it steers us away from vulnerability and connection. These protective mechanisms were clearly present in Brown's family dynamics, where emotional expression outside of anger was largely forbidden. Over time, recognizing and dismantling these armors became a central theme in her personal and professional life, helping her to live more aligned with her values and maintain meaningful relationships. She shares that this ongoing process of shedding armor is a crucial developmental milestone, particularly midlife's demanding invitation to greater self-awareness and transformation. Brown candidly reflects on her childhood in Texas, describing a household permeated by loud emotional volatility and limited emotional vocabulary. Raised in a family where anger was acceptable, but sadness, vulnerability, and nuanced emotions were not, she became hypervigilant, keenly attuned to the complexities and dangers around her as a survival mechanism. This heightened awareness helped her navigate unpredictable family scenarios, but also contributed to feelings of disconnection and being an outsider, both at home and at school. The emotional environment shaped her early model of love as something potentially imprisoning and painful, especially observing her mother's verbal confrontations and her father's withdrawn responses. This formative experience led Brown to initially avoid romantic relationships for fear of entrapment and emotional pain, demonstrating how family legacies can profoundly influence our interpersonal dynamics and capacity for connection. Brown introduces a research-based framework called the 4 Steps to Courage, derived from extensive studies involving tens of thousands of participants globally. These involve first identifying and understanding one's core values, and then recognizing what obstacles interfere with embracing vulnerability. The model proceeds through building trust, notably through the metaphor of the marble jar, where trust accumulates incrementally through small, consistent actions, and finally learning to recover after setbacks. The marble jar provides a tangible way to conceptualize trust, especially for leaders who must earn it continually, often in crisis situations. Rather than requesting blind allegiance, leaders build trust through empathy, transparency, and acknowledgement of effort, even when outcomes shift unexpectedly. Brown emphasizes that trust is not about perpetual correctness, but about honesty, accountability, and openness, qualities essential to both personal and organizational resilience. The conversation expands into the complex terrain of power, distinguishing 4 distinct types: power over, power with, power to, and power within. Brown critiques power over, the controlling, exploitative use of power, as both ineffective and harmful in the long term. It manifests as a finite resource that leaders hoard and protect through fear, cruelty, and exclusion, which cannot be sustained neurobiologically or socially. Conversely, the other forms, power with, to, and within, underscore collaboration, collective strength, personal agency, and honoring individual differences. Brown asserts that in the evolving landscapes of business, politics, and social organizations, success increasingly depends on leaders who exercise these empowering forms of power. She discusses the unsustainable toll of leadership rooted in fear and coercion, underlining the imperative to foster inclusive, trusting, and adaptive cultures. A significant thread of the discussion centers on systems theory, which Brown embraces as vital for navigating complexity in organizations and broader society. She explains the necessity for systems to maintain permeable boundaries, allowing for feedback loops that enable learning and adaptation. When systems close off out of fear or discomfort, they begin to atrophy, becoming self-referential and fragile in a rapidly changing world. Brown illustrates this with contemporary examples such as geopolitical instability, market disruptions, and the rise of artificial intelligence, which demand ongoing openness and cognitive flexibility. The risk, she warns, lies in wanting certainty and control that prompt us to close boundaries instead, hindering growth and responsiveness. The antidote is cultivating awareness of nuance, paradox, and uncertainty as part of resilient and future-ready systems. The dialogue navigates into the digital terrain, where algorithms, especially those powered by AI, significantly influence human attention and belief systems. Brown articulates concerns about how these systems optimize for engagement by showing content that aligns with pre-existing beliefs or provokes fear, thereby reinforcing echo chambers and polarization rather than fostering critical thinking or exposure to diverse perspectives. She acknowledges the complex incentives behind these business models and the geopolitical race driving AI development, which constrains simple regulatory solutions. Brown recounts conversations with industry insiders, revealing a divide between those raising ethical concerns and the relentless push for competitive advantage. This complexity underscores the need for cognitive sovereignty, a conscious effort to wrest control over our attention and discernment from algorithmic design. Brown highlights the profound human need for connection, which is neurobiologically embedded and vital for well-being. The absence of connection leads inexorably to suffering. She elaborates that connection is not limited to interpersonal relationships, but extends to a sense of belonging to something larger, community, purpose, or spirituality. For Brown, spirituality itself is defined as this inextricable connection beyond self, embodied in the search for common humanity despite differences. The podcast's title points to a spiritual crisis, which Brown situates within contemporary fragmentation, loneliness, and societal discord. She discusses how belonging requires both acceptance of self and others, and the courage to stand alone when true belonging demands authenticity over conformity. This paradox highlights the tension in current cultural dynamics marked by ideological bunkers and polarized us versus them mentalities. Brown and the host explore the divisiveness of contemporary political and social discourse. She addresses the rise of tribalism and ideological purity that fractures communities and personal relationships, producing counterfeit forms of belonging based on shared hatred or exclusion instead of genuine connection. She underscores the intense loneliness and heartbreak of navigating these divides while trying to uphold nuance and empathy. Yet Brown asserts the necessity of standing alone for authenticity and integrity, the courage to resist pressures to conform at the cost of betraying oneself. The price is social isolation, but the reward is true belonging, founded on honest self-expression. She acknowledges the difficulty of this stance in a world incentivized by simplistic binaries and urges continued dialogue across divides grounded in shared humanity. Throughout the conversation, Brown emphasizes that vulnerability and trust are processes, not states. They build slowly through repeated small risks and demonstrations, such as those visible in her marble jar metaphor. For individuals scarred by trauma or adverse histories, this process demands substantial courage and often professional support to remove layers of armor. She highlights the essential role of context, safety, and relational accountability that particularly for marginalized individuals facing added barriers to vulnerability. Trust develops incrementally and can be quickly shattered, especially by emotional disengagement or betrayal. Brown insists leaders and individuals alike must carefully steward trust and vulnerability, recognizing their fragility and profound human importance. Brown shares deeply personal stories about losing her mother to dementia and the caregiving challenges that accompanied the journey. She relates the intense emotional, physical, and mental toll caregiving exacts, especially when entwined with complicated family dynamics and past trauma. There is an eloquent expression of the ambivalence in grief, profound sorrow, but also relief when suffering ends, a reality often stigmatized but crucial to acknowledge. This narrative enriches the themes of vulnerability and resilience, illustrating how intimate caregiving experiences call for strong ground, a metaphor Brown developed for the embodied strength needed to endure life's upheavals. It is a reminder of the sacredness and difficulty of human connection in its most raw and demanding forms. Brown's work blends rigorous academic research with humanistic storytelling and practical tools for leadership and personal growth. She shares her development of key concepts such as grounded confidence, emotional awareness, anticipatory thinking, and situational awareness, all supported by data from thousands globally. These skills prepare individuals and leaders to navigate complexity with resilience and integrity.